Hello.
Welcome to another episode of the Dawn of Shades. I am your host, Gia Scott, and today is July 29th, 2008. Summer is marching forward, and although we haven't noticed it yet, the days are already growing shorter. Hot summer days, steamy summer nights, camping out, campfires, and the ghost stories and tales of terror that seem to be the theme for many a campfire discussion. I'm plagued with a horribly vivid imagination and a less than wonderful memory of some of those stories. I do remember that a favorite story to send me into fits of absolute terror was one called, Who's Got My Golden Arm? I don't recall the story completely other than it was something about a man who married a young woman then proceeded to die. Whether it was with her help or natural causes, I don't recall. This man had an arm that he lost to some accident and a golden arm as a replacement. Upon his death and burial, the young wife kept the arm, inducing the restless ghost to haunt her with the chilling cries of, Who's got my golden arm? Who's got my golden arm? Over and over. Like many people who grew up in the 60s, I grew up with golden books, and back then they had wonderful illustrations. We had one particular book, I think it was called the Big Golden Book of Poetry, or something along those lines. It had wonderful poems inside of it that made me smile, like The Raggedy Man and Custer the Cowardly Dragon. My mom was very skilled at reading them and brought them to life for us regularly. It's probably thanks to her that I have my love of literature and poetry to this day. But getting back to the poems in that book, there was a poem that horrified me and sent me into absolute seizures of terror and amused my brother and sister to no end because of my reaction to it. I'm not sure of the title, but I remember the line that would get me every time. The goblins will get you if you don't watch out. These creatures were horrible. Long arms, perfect for snaking up from under a bed or out of a closet door that was barely ajar, or from behind that big easy chair in the shadows. And that's exactly where these horrible things lived, in the shadows and the dark places in the house. To this day, I confess, I am afraid of the dark inside of the house. It doesn't bother me a lick outside, but inside, I still shiver and hear my mom's voice whispering, The goblins will get you if you don't watch out. These goblins were especially fond of bad children who talked back and behaved badly, and I wonder if that influenced my childhood behavior more than the promise of rewards when Santa made his annual trip around the world. Now, I may not be a famous writer of poetry, and it may be nothing more than an amusement that I do play with the rhymes. Here's one for you, for not much reason other than I can, and I'm curious what you, the listeners, will make of this poem and what it's all about. Dancing dogs are posing pooches, silly boys distill smooches. Firelight reaches for the moonlight, music threads to the starlight. Cool night breezes wafting smokes, then the village did begin to choke. Traveling band had no hand, 'twas the noble with his dirty sand. Still the anger did rise, without being wise and using a blade made of lies. The innocent spilled their blood on dirt. The village with curse did begin to flirt. Slumbering under poison ivy vines, covering up the old bloodlines. Gloom and sorrow still gripped those who lied, and still they tried to forget that ill-born ride. A baby's cry, heard in the night, a scream of terrified fright. Nobody sounds that fall on the ear. Nobody makes that silent tear. So, to make a comment, just go to www.exogenynetwork.com. That's spelled EXOGENYNETWORK. And click on Contact Us and tell me what you think of that poem and what it's about. Now, stories, they tell us a lot about our lives, and often the stories live on far longer than the people do. When I was very young, I had a younger cousin. And when she was a toddler, just learning to talk, our great-grandfather paid a visit at Christmas time, and then, as was his habit, went home shortly after, returning for another visit months later. Being very young, she quite easily mixed up the words, and she remembered her great-granddad quite well, as we all adored him, for his habit was to treat us all like intelligent people, even if we were still sporting diapers and drooling down our chins. There wasn't any kid in the family that didn't adore time spent with him. But she got her words and her greetings all confused, and what came out of her mouth was, Merry Granddad, instead of, hello, Great-Granddad. It stuck to him like glue, and forever after that, he was known by all of us as Merry Granddad. My own daughter always knew him as Merry Granddad and still calls him that when she talks about events she recalls that he participated in, although he died about a decade ago. Stories can be oral history. They can be lessons of many kinds, from the stories of the Bible to the stories of the Magician's Apprentice or the Emperor's New Clothes. Sometimes they're subtle, sometimes they're emotional, sometimes they're shouted from the rooftops or sung in songs. For hundreds of years now, we've had the option of writing our stories down in a manner that means they remain intact, unchanged, just the way we are telling them in the books. Over the last 100 years, we have seen immense changes in technology. It has only been recently that we've seen a real change in how we tell our stories. With the birth of the computer as an incarnation inexpensive enough to be part of most households in the industrialized world, we saw the Internet explode. With that has come things like this program, available on Internet radio and on podcast on demand. Stories are told on websites, and then the next step was an e-book or electronic or digital book. For most of us, that means we read them on our computers. Amazon has another version called the Kindle, which allows even periodical materials to be downloaded wirelessly to this electronic gizmo. I personally subscribe to several magazines in an electronic format. I like it. It offers me things that aren't available in the paper version. It doesn't require a lot of space to store. It isn't a fire hazard. And Smokey Robinson, also known as the Shredder, isn't going to shred them into quarter-sized pieces while I'm at work. I've seen and read several e-books, and these were typically self-published, less than wonderful examples of literary endeavors. Unfortunately, this experience wasn't unique to me and has led many people to roll their eyes at the mere mention of an e-book. I was pleasantly surprised by the book written by tonight's guest, Elizabeth Egan Cox. As a radio host, I'm sent a lot of material to read, both in electronic and in paper formats. I have huge stacks of books that I need to read and review. I have another stack of things I would like to read. I have magazines coming in each week with things that I should read in them. I suppose it gives me a little bit of a jaded outlook on a lot of it, but I'm thrilled when I get a book and I actually like it. Elizabeth's book, A Ghost of a Chance, and is called A Ghost of a Chance, and it was initially promoted to me as a paranormal novel. I would say that label was a little bit limiting, and I would describe it more as a mystery with a paranormal twist. So, without any more babbling from me, let's get Elizabeth on the air and let her do her own introduction. So, Elizabeth, are you there?
I am here. Thank you for the introduction there about electronic books. And before I say anything about myself, I wanted to say that I agree with you. In the very beginning, electronic book publishing was really like the only outlet self-published authors had to do, other than doing the print-on-demand and self-published hard print publishers that are out there. But as a person who has never, ever self-published, because I'm a professional, I strived and looked hard and long to find a professional, royalty-paying electronic book publisher. And I think at this point I do kind of want to mention my electronic book publisher, which is ebooksonThe.net, because the founding owner of ebooksonThe.net is Arlene Chase, and Arlene Chase used to be an instructor for Writer's Digest, which is a Bible in the writing industry. And probably no one knows better than Arlene Chase the future of electronic publishing for professional writers. And so I really would like to thank ebooksonThe.net, because they not only took a chance on this book, but they took a chance on it because it's going to be a series. And then the other thing I would like to say is that I couldn't agree with you more about this is really more of a mystery with a paranormal twist. And maybe a little bit along the line we can kind of discuss that broad umbrella of what paranormal is. because
we've had whole shows about what is paranormal.
Yeah. And
we never really have clearly defined it.
I mean, I would have preferred more like a supernatural, but you don't.
Even supernatural is an umbrella so broad that it really almost means nothing.
But anyway, I consider this an old-fashioned, cozy ghost mystery. But when I went looking in that category, I couldn't find that category for a genre, and I come to find out in the industry, insiders in the publishing industry consider this a paranormal mystery because the ghost element is viable to the plot. It's treated as a reality to the plot. It's not a fantasy or an imagination. It is, in fact, the ghost is a lead character in the plot. Okay, so to get to a proper introduction, my name is Elizabeth Egan Cox. My website, which I spent most of the morning launching, is myname.com. Elizabeth, as in Queen Elizabeth. Egan, which is spelled E-A-G-A-N. Cox, C-O-X.com. And it's a very simplified author's website. It has information about the book, a little bit of information about me. But the other thing I would like to get across is that if we choose to publish electronically, and I'm talking about professional authors and writers, and if people who enjoy the writing of professionals choose to read it electronically, we can make a significant eco-friendly change to the environment. Maybe reading on your computer or your laptop or an e-book reader such as the Amazon Kindle. You know, I went online and I did this survey and I found there are e-book readers from major manufacturers like RCA up to the Amazon Kindle, and they go for everything from $40 up to the Amazon Kindle, which is $360. And the Amazon Kindle is almost more like a little miniature computer in and of itself. But I know dozens and dozens of college students, because I'm here in the area near the University of Redlands in Redlands, California, who choose to read e-books on their laptops, and that's how I read them. But it is becoming so significant that Simon & Schuster, a major publisher for eons in the hard print trade, recently listed on their website this information, and I took this right off the Simon & Schuster website. In the Simon & Schuster Sales Division, they have recently launched an electronic manuscript program in which all of their sales reps have been given an e-book reader, replacing photocopied manuscripts. The sales reps will now download manuscripts, only those manuscripts they choose to read. And Simon & Schuster estimates that this initiative has the potential to reduce the number of manuscripts reproduced for its sales division by 20,000 per year. In addition, an e-book reader program is being piloted by the Simon & Schuster editorial department. What does that mean? Well, what that means, according to places like echobrain.com, is that because e-books are paper-free, easily storable and transferable electronic files, they give book readers the option of, I should put my glasses on to read this. They give book readers the option of reading on the computer screen or a handheld device or a laptop computer and printing off only the pages they deem necessary, if at all. Additionally, because ebooks are delivered and produced electronically, very little energy is used in their creation and no fuel is used in their delivery. Something else that I pulled up, and this actually came from the United States book industry, is that if we could go to using more and more ebooks, then according to a study that was done by the U.S. book industry, the carbon footprint, okay, that's that negative footprint on the ecology, which is 62.7% because of harvest of timber and transport to a mill, that 62.7% could be reduced drastically. Another part of that carbon footprint comes from the production of paper and the printing impacts of paper. And what that means by the printing impacts is the remainder of all that paper sludge that isn't used, which is a whopping 26.6%. And then another aspect is that, and this is one thing that really hit home to me, 50% of all hard printed books, and hard print, whether they have a hardcover or they're the mass market paperbacks that you see in drugstores and grocery stores, 50% of those are returned to landfills.
Oh, lovely.
I know. And you know what? I always wondered about that because, like everyone, I go into the large chain bookstores. And the other thing I discovered is that so many of the large chain bookstores out in here in California have turned more into coffee houses or music stores than bookstores. And you go in, and it's like no matter what the season is, there's just dozens and dozens and dozens of books on the bargain tables. Now, I have been a hard print author, and I think you and I talked a little bit about that at another time. And one of the things that happens is that if you are a traditional hard print author, when you get a contract, you have to come to terms with the fact that when Barnes & Noble, Borders, or any bookstore, let alone the large chain bookstores, decide that they need to sell your book at a loss and put it on one of those bargain tables, you virtually get 0 cents. So it's like, I know, it's a huge loss to the author. You know, and then the other thing is that if those books were ordered by the bookstore and then returned to the publisher, and many bookstores do that because, you know, they go through their own issue with taxes. They don't want to pay taxes on their stock that they haven't sold, so it's returned before they have to do that inventory. Well, books that are returned to the author, even if they sat in that book publisher's back storeroom and the box was never opened, once they are returned to the publisher, they cannot be sold. And so, you know, the publisher sometimes the publisher will go ahead and send a few on to the author, and the author can use that as review copies. But more often than not, they get put into a landfill, brand new books. Often the covers are torn off of them, but still they get put into the trash and into the landfill. So I think what it came down to, as a person who has been a traditional hard print author for nonfiction, when I decided to take this story that I had sold to a British e-zine and turn it into a novel, I knew right from the very beginning that I wanted to do this electronically because where I live, I don't have the option of taking rapid transit. That's not viable for me. I live 30 minutes away from a gas station, a bank, a service station, all of the amenities. I have to drive off of the mountain to do that. And even the closest valley that I go to, which is the Redlands, San Bernardino area of Southern California, does not have reliable transportation. It doesn't go up the mountain.
Yeah, you know, that's always a problem when you live in a rural area because of population density. It would not be cost effective or environmentally wise to provide mass transit because who's going to get on the bus?
Exactly. Plus, I live in a four-season environment. I drive a Jeep Wrangler. I keep snow tires on it. I carry chains. They're not going to do that for rapid transit where I live. So people who live in rural areas, I think we try to approach being eco-friendly in one of the best ways we can. We do rely a lot on our computers. My publisher is on the East Coast. I live on the West Coast or the left coast. Every aspect of my book, the editing, going back and forth with the art editor on it, me sending her my feeble ideas of what I would like to see, everything about it was done through electronic communication and email. To me, that's one of the most fascinating things is that, and that also cuts down on the carbon imprint, is that I don't have to commute. I can get up in the morning, and even though I am sometimes working at 6 a.m. because that's 9 a.m. on the East Coast where my publisher is, I did not have to get in my car and commute an hour somewhere, which if you live in rural California, that's what you're going to have to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so that in and of itself, people who live in rural areas and who depend on the Internet, doing maybe their shopping on the Internet, reading an e-book, whether it's on their desk computer, whether they're doing it on a handheld device, on their laptop, it becomes the friendly way to do it. And so, as an author, it felt good. It felt good from a business sense, but it also felt good from a spiritual sense. Because I do believe that as we leave footprints, those footprints have repercussions. And those repercussions go back in time, but they also go forward in time. And so maybe that little hint of paranormal, maybe I should actually talk about my book.
Well, we do have plenty of time, but, in terms of just an average person, okay, even if you're not really worried about the environment, when you look at electronically transmitted books, magazines, newspapers, etc., it makes sense for me because I may not be interested in this article this week. I may be interested in it from a year from now.
Mm-hmm.
But then, if I had it in a stack of magazines here at home, how much time would I waste trying to find that article again?
Exactly.
And you can search.
Mm-hmm.
Like with my online magazines, I can search for an article. If I have a book on here and I want to know, what did this character do at such and such a point, or if I'm looking for, a reference, in a reference ebook,
mm-hmm.
then, there again, I can search. I don't have to waste time paging through a book, finding the book. In my case, it'd be finding the book because I do. I have stacks and stacks of books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and then
I'm just
when you talk about moving, the energy you spend even boxing up those books and loading them in a vehicle,
mm-hmm.
that's a lot of energy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also, if you're using it on a computer, a laptop, or an e-book reader, you can have dozens and dozens of books on there. I first discovered how easy it is to read an e-book off of a laptop when I was in 2004, and actually I think I was flying to New Orleans at that time. And they're very strict on airlines. You cannot use your computers with an internet access. And so the people right across the aisle from me, they had opened up their laptop and they had it on. And I was really curious, but I didn't want to be nosy. And so I asked the attendant, I said, "They're not on the internet, are they?" And she said, "Oh no, honey, they're reading an e-book." And I was just absolutely fascinated. And it was the row that had 3 in it, and it was, I think, a husband and a wife, and then there was someone else traveling with them. I don't know if that was their son or not. But I noticed that the wife read some of her book, and she gave it to the husband, and he switched over, and he was reading an entirely different book.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, how handy is that? Carry one laptop, and the whole family can, read a book on it if they want to.
You can, it's amazing. Traveling with my daughter, we could have movies on here. I could have music on here. I could have books on here. It was cases of material, and yet it was in one small laptop.
Yes. And the other aspect is that this is growing in popularity by leaps and bounds. I got another little bit of information, and this comes from the 2007 report from the Association of American Publishers. And in just a 5-year period from 2002 to 2007, now, ebooks, the biggest competitor for ebooks, because ebooks are a really great outlet for genre fiction. And for your listeners who may not understand what genre fiction is that mass market paper book. Those are the categories of mystery, of thrillers, of romance, of westerns. Those are the ones that you find readily available in your supermarkets and drugstores and Walmarts and so on and so forth. Well, over a 5-year period, according to the American Book, let's see, who did I say this was? Yeah, the Association of American Book Publishers. Over a 5-year period, mass market paperback sales have gone down minus 1.7%, where in that same 5-year period, electronic books, which would be the electronic version of a mass market paper book, have gone up a whopping 55.7% in 5 years. That clearly tells you that people are catching on to it, and they're appreciating not only the convenience, but yes, the eco-friendly aspect of it. And ebooks, the electronic book version of what would be a mass market paperback. Now, the last time I bought a mass market paperback I wanted to read, it was $8.
Yeah.
An ebook is $5.50. My book sells for $5.50, and the person will be able to go to the publisher's website. By the way, my book technically does not come out until this Friday, August 1st, but the publisher released it early at MobiPocket.com. People who are accustomed to ebooks are familiar with MobiPocket because it's a large distributor of all kinds of ebooks, and so it's already there. They eventually, probably within the month, it'll be on Amazon, as well as Fiction-Wise, which is also a huge distributor for the various different genres of ebooks. You know, and they can just go there and order it, and it's immediate. I mean, it is immediate. It can go right into their computer, their handheld device, their iPod, whatever they want it to. It becomes immediate.
You know, I discovered something else too, reading your book, as opposed to a chance. It was, I'm like many, many other Americans, and I suffer from something known as aging eyes, or otherwise known as short arms. And what's really neat about an ebook is I can adjust the setting.
Yes.
Turn it into large print. I'm not, supporting the fact that I really don't see that well without glasses.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have to wear glasses, yet I can comfortably read it.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved it. You know, I really did. It was much easier for me to read the book on the LCD screen of my laptop than it was to try and get the light right and read a regular book.
You know what? Thank you for bringing that up, because I do that automatically. I've worn reading glasses my entire life, and I'm 56 years old, and I've had to use reading glasses since I was 20. And one of the wonderful things about either reading it on the screen, whether it's your laptop or an e-reader, is that it's backlit. You can read it almost in a darkened room. Well, I have read it in a darkened room. But yes, you can change the font size so that when I'm reading online, I don't have to put on my glasses. And for me, I don't know about, for other people, but if I don't have to wear my reading glasses because the font size is large enough and comfortable, and I can sit back in my chair and put my feet up, my eyes don't get nearly as tired than when I have to put on my glasses. And I love that aspect of it.
Besides that, for me, it's a case of my glasses frequently meet mysterious ends. I have lost them. I have broken them. I have sat on them, stepped on them. I literally stepped on a pair one time. It was like a scene from a, that sailor, Popeye cartoon. You know, they fell off my head. I tried to get them. Instead, I stepped on them. Smash. I buy them half a dozen pairs at a time, which tells you they really do meet mysterious ends. And so I can't find them.
Yeah. And how frustrating is that? I actually have 3 different prescriptions. So for me, it gets to be very annoying. I'm supposed to I have a special set there just for working on the computer. I have a set of reading glasses, and then I have another set that's sort of like a bifocal that I can walk around in. But as you mentioned, when you can adjust the font size, then I don't have to worry about trying to find any one single pair of my glasses. I can just turn it on and start reading it.
Yeah, these are all things ebook reader or ebook promoters don't mention. Because we are a nation of aging people. There are more people in the age group that suffers from that short arm syndrome now than ever before.
Yes. When I go in to see my ophthalmologist once a year, he has mentioned that again and again and again, and that often people don't think about that when they're working online at their home computer, especially those who may not use the computer for a form of work. Now, my eye doctor knows that I'm on the computer sometimes 8 or 9 hours a day, and so he actually does some kind of special test to determine which power or whatever kind of glasses it is I need, and that helps tremendously. But I think a lot of people who kind of use it more as a hobby may not realize that looking at that computer screen and the different sizes of computer screen can have an impact on your vision.
Well, I know that back in the days, which tells you how long I've been using computers, back in the days of the monochromatic screens, I had special glasses because essentially my eyes were being sunburned by the UV light coming off of the screen. I would go home at night after 8 hours on a computer, and my eyes would be red and burning and very painful, and so I'd seen the eye doctor. I had UV protection in my normal reading glasses. And actually, after I had an accident that actually corrected my vision. I no longer had to wear glasses full time. And I had clear glasses that just had UV protection in them. There was no correction, just the UV protection for the screen.
Yeah, I kind of got started in computers. I was, you and I talked about this briefly before, I was a librarian. And I was a librarian in the 1980s when, at a point out here in California, students who were going to graduate had to be computer proficient. And so I also ran a computer lab. And at that time, they weren't quite sure of what the effects would be in, having to deal with the computer screen day in and day out. And my eye doctor did exactly the same thing. I had a pair of these tinted glasses. They were almost sort of a rosy color, tinted, and they had this anti-glare film on top of it. And it was...
Mine were actually clear. There was no tint to it. But I'm trying to think, when I got them probably in the mid to late 80s.
Okay, yeah.
So maybe, just a few years later. And, instead of California, I was in Arizona. So different, possibly in how the local eye doctors treated things.
Oh, well, and it was so new. I think they just didn't know what to make of it, too. They just didn't have the...
Yeah, he saw me with a specific complaint. I had red, painful eyes.
I did, too. And I would come home, and even at night, after I'd been home for a while and had relaxed, I would go to bed, and I would see, like, these red dots. It was just the strangest thing, kind of as if you'd been at a family reunion where all day long you've been staring into flashbulbs.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to admit, screens have improved dramatically. Today, I just wear normal over-the-counter cheaters, and I don't have any problems with red eyes. But I don't spend quite as many hours on the computer now as I did probably then. Because, like I said, it was probably 8 to 10 hours, depending on how long I worked that day.
Yes.
And the screens were horrible. The resolution was horrible. The dot matrix sort of print was difficult to read to begin with.
Yes.
Yeah. So, things have improved a lot.
Oh, and I can remember no choice in font style.
Oh, no. It came in one kind, hard to read.
One kind. And, of course, at the very beginning, they went with what was used on typewriters. I'm going up to my font right now to try and remember it. I think it was called Courier, if I remember correctly.
Well, I know that was one of the old typewriter fonts. Yeah,
Courier. I can remember the very first computers that came out that were, very large and cumbersome. And this was, it was the mid-1980s when I was running a computer lab. All I can remember is that Miami Vice was on TV. But the first computers had Courier font style, and that was very typical of what was used on your regular typewriters, and it was a horrible font style to use on computers. But everything has improved. You know, technology is going forward, and, you know,
E-books in the 80s would have been an agony.
Oh, yes, definitely. Definitely. Well, it's like any other new technology. You know, I can remember when, years and years ago, in the early 90s, I was a weekly columnist for RadioDigest.com, which is now defunct. And at that time, that was when XM satellite radio was the new buzz. And everyone was just scared to death that it was going to make our traditional radio obsolete. And then after that came web radio. And it amazes me how no matter what the technology is, it's as if it comes in and it fills an empty spot we never knew we had until it's there and we're using it and we find out that it's a viable option for other aspects of our lifestyle that we weren't aware of, you know, to begin with.
Well, you know, in terms of terrestrial radio versus internet radio tends to be radio that fits specific niches. You can't be that specific. You can't have a station that, you know, like the UFO Paranormal Radio Network.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you couldn't stick that in Podunk, Arkansas, and have a big enough listening audience to warrant having such a specific sort of station. So, you know, on the internet, you can, because you're pulling from an entire world.
Yes, yes, and so that niche becomes a region, a very large region, like you said. To me, it's absolutely amazing, you know, just incredibly amazing that people can find their niche, their genre of what really interests them, and then begin to meet up and network with other people who have that same interest.
Yeah, you know, it's an amazing, amazing world. You know, and I think about my great-grandparents went from horse and buggies to seeing a man land on the moon.
Yeah.
You know, I went from a man landing on the moon to seeing, you know, the information explosion that we have today, where we really almost have too much information. It's hard to make a decision because there's continual information available.
You know, that's an interesting aspect, because I've had people ask me about, oh, they don't want to get into the internet, they don't want a computer, there's just too much information. It's sort of like a sensory overload of information. But I think as people become more accustomed to it, it's like going into a huge supermarket as opposed to that mom and pop grocery store. They each have their place. You know, the mom and pop grocery store, which sadly is disappearing, those are the people you grew up around. You know, you don't have to tell them you want that, you know, extra little bit of something in your coffee or whatever. But then you go into a super grocery store, and there might be a variety there of something that you've been looking for that you can't find anywhere else. And to me, that's kind of what cyberspace is. I love cyberspace, but I'm in a rural area. I'm in one of those little podunk communities. I kid you not. When they did the census up here, I walked around with the census taker because he was getting lost. And we ended up with a final census of 1,102 souls. I say souls because many of us are convinced that most people counted their dogs and cats as members of their household. And to me, this is a boon because I do live in a very rural area where we have one access road in and one access road out, absolutely no amenities. And so getting into the internet allows me to kind of stay in contact with what is going on in the world and also to communicate with people all over. I mean, you're in New Orleans?
Yes.
Okay, and I'm in Southern California.
And we're instantly in communication.
Yeah, last week I was doing an interview with a person who is in upstate New York.
Yeah.
Next week I'm doing an interview with a person who is in Las Vegas. This would never have happened any other way. You know, so I try to get a point to people. Don't be afraid of technology. Technology is what you make out of it, and there's a place for everyone. Just don't be don't be scared to get your big toe wet. Just go ahead and stick it in there.
Yeah, it is. It's a lot of fun, and you don't have to see every website. You don't have to read every article.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to shop every storefront. You know, it's just you can say, okay, I'm going to look at this much, and that's it.
Yeah.
Now, I do have a question in the virtual auditorium for you.
Okay.
And the question is, Elizabeth was a columnist for Old California Gazette. Did she cover a lot of rural issues there, or was it historical rather than geographic?
When I was writing for the Old California Gazette, I did 2 columns. One was a spoof column called Ask Auntie Fanny, and it was a spoof in the sense that Auntie Fanny was a very tight-laced Victorian woman who gave Victorian answers to present-day questions. So if someone were to ask Auntie Fanny about how to operate a mouse, Auntie Fanny would have been in total, just horror that anyone would want to operate a mouse because a mouse was vermin to her. So that was the spoof part. The other column was called Fashions and Fancies, and that's a misleading title. It had nothing to do really with clothing and apparel and what we wear, but rather it drew a contrast between present-day lifestyles and lifestyles of the 1800s. And I can remember one column was as I was traveling on the freeways in Southern California, neighborhoods that were golf community neighborhoods were like the latest place that you would want to buy your home out in the suburbs. And they were just popping up everywhere. It used to be that golf club communities were very exclusive. And these were just, you could hardly go. If you drove from Palm Springs, which is in the eastern part of Southern California, about 3 hours to Los Angeles on Interstate I-10, you would have come across probably over a dozen golf club communities that you could see from the freeway. And that phenomena was not new. That phenomena began in California. One of the first golf club communities was in Redlands, California. The other one, I think, was up near Pasadena, I forget. And so I would try to draw a contrast between present-day lifestyles and lifestyles of California of the 1800s. And so technically you would say it was more historical. But the Old California Gazette was well known for its historical articles. And then also about doing what they used to call heritage touring. Probably second to the amusement parks in California, such as Disneyland. I realize it's probably called, you see, I grew up in California, so it's still Disneyland to me. Knott's Berry Farm.
Change its name?
Pardon?
Did they change its name?
I think they call it, what do they call it?
I don't know. I thought it was Disneyland, and Disney World was in Florida.
Okay, Disney World is in Florida. They do technically call it...
I could be wrong, but that's
yeah,
what I thought.
technically they call it something else because they have the California Adventure at Disneyland and SeaWorld in San Diego. That traveling and experiencing the tourist spots that have California heritage to them was second only to the amusement parks and the zoos. And so the Old California Gazette kind of concentrated on California of the 1800s in its articles. Okay. Yeah, it was really popular with schools, but it was also very, very popular with tourists, and all the tourist spots usually either gave it out free, like at the hotel you were staying, or there was a corner vending machine nearby where you could pick it up for 25 or 50 cents. I forget how much it cost. But it was a lot of fun writing for the Old California Gazette, and the publisher of that, Karen Spring, wherever she is. Karen, I hope you're doing well. I think it had just kind of, run its course, as many things do.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I find history fascinating. A lot of people, they kind of go groan when they hear the term history. But that's because they had a really boring high school history teacher that made them memorize dates and never told them why anything happened.
That's true.
And it is, because history is nothing more than a story.
That's it. Uh-huh.
You know, it's a story of what happened, and the interesting parts are usually why it happened. And that takes a little bit of digging even today.
Yes, it does.
And I find that's a fun thing. And historical novels take the truth of history and add it into the fiction and sort of make it come to life, I think.
Well, that's what I tried to do with this novel, A Ghost of a Chance. In fact, one of the reasons I absolutely loved the publisher is that I had written several pages of author's notes at the end that I wanted to remain in the book because it explained many of the historical aspects. For instance, I studied Victorian sleight of hand magic. And for anyone listening who's not sure what sleight of hand is, that's your up-close parlor magic. This is not your TV illusions or the stage that's far away. This was the magic that was very popular in the 1800s. It was done in parlors. It was done, up close and very personal. And I studied that because the magician aspect is very important to the plot of the book. And actually, in the author's notes, I reveal how one of the sleight of hand tricks was done. And so I studied that aspect. I also studied Victorian architecture, which I've had a love for many, many years anyway. And then I studied, which also is very dear to my heart because I grew up in Southern California, I studied the colonial aspect to California Hispanic culture. And this is something that people who travel to California, it's kind of new to them because as Americans, when we think of colonial, we think of New England and the 13 original colonies, Virginia, Williamsburg, Jamestown, Plymouth Rock, that kind of thing. As a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution, whose ancestry goes back to colonial Williamsburg and the Carolinas, I understand that. But out here on the West Coast, the colonial culture, that European culture that founded and colonized California, was the Spanish. And from the Spanish coming up from Mexico, California was Mexico until 1849, 1850, until the Mexican-American War. And so that founding culture is very much a part of my book. Anyone who has lived in California for any length of time or grew up here like I did, chances are you have some of that Hispanic culture in my family. In my case, my in-laws are Hispanic. And so I drew upon that non-stereotyped version of the true California Hispanics to include those characters in my book. Because I want people to understand the appreciation that I have for it.
Oh, wow.
It's very near and dear. If I were going to write this story and I was going to place it in the Tidewater area of Virginia, where my ancestors helped to build St. Peter's Parish Church in Townsville, New Kent County, Virginia, then I would not be writing so much, I wouldn't be writing about the Hispanic colonial culture. I would be writing about my Scottish colonial culture, because it's my Scottish culture that goes back to colonial Williamsburg and St. Peter's Parish Church at New Kent County, Virginia. In order for people to appreciate that aspect, many people don't realize that Jamestown probably had as many Scottish and Irish in it as they did English. And I say that from knowing that my family goes back to that area to 1632. And so, that aspect of history, I think, is important, or at least it was important to me, because it was part of who my characters are in the book.
You're going to have to do one set in New Orleans, because it's just, you have the Spanish, you have the Canary Islanders, you have the Germans, you have the French, you have the Creoles, you have the Cajuns, you have the Americans.
Yes.
And just so much, all intertwined in no one part. rules, you know?
Yeah, I think I've told you before, having been to New Orleans, I love New Orleans. I absolutely love it. And I think I also told you that I have ancestors buried at one of the oldest cemeteries there in Metairie. You know, and that's part of my Irish heritage. And yes, I could very easily see going to New Orleans or having the lead character Shannon Delaney being on assignment in New Orleans. You know, it would be a very easy thing to do. Other places, would be, you and I also talked about the East Texas Bayou country, which, by the way, okay, the poem that you read, okay, while you were reading that poem, what immediately came to mind when I was in the East Texas Bayou country of Jefferson, which is very historic. It was an old riverport area.
Yes.
And I took a bayou tour, and waiting around to take that bayou tour, there was a gentleman there who was also from East Texas, and he was telling his grandson a ghost story. He was waiting to go on the same bayou tour that I was. And the ghost story that he told took place in those bayous there of East Texas, and it had to do with the 1800s, when a family of Irish, Scottish travelers, now for those out there not knowing, travelers in the Celtic world would be what we would call gypsies.
Yes.
But in Ireland and Scotland, you don't call them gypsies, you call them travelers. And they were in that area, and there had been a kidnapping and a murder of a teenage girl. And this goes back to the 1800s. And the travelers were blamed for it. And they were camping out in one of the bayous. And a group of men from the area, in the dark of night, stole upon them and murdered them. And that's what your poem reminded me of.
Actually, I'll have to fess up, because it's not that particular story, but it's a very similar story.
Okay.
It's a very similar story, and you're probably one of the few people that would have noted the term travelers.
Okay.
A lot of people don't realize that is what many people call the gypsies.
Yes.
Are actually called.
They're called travelers, yes. And every single one, and it was a very small family of gypsies. Every single one of them was murdered, and they were buried out there in the bayou. And for those people who aren't familiar with it, a bayou is a swamp. And boy,
technically the term means slow-moving water.
Yes. Yeah, a bayou can lead to a swamp, I guess. I don't know.
Swamp sort of implies that sometimes it might be almost dry.
Yes.
But a bayou has enough water that you can at least move a pirogue
it's
through it.
moving.
Yeah, I used to make jokes before I moved here about the pirogue being called a P-rock, and I didn't want to get in any boat called a P-rock. But I've seen people using these pirogues, and if they are skilled with them, it's absolutely amazing.
Yes.
I wouldn't call myself skilled with one. I've never used one, but they are fascinating. And I've seen pictures of people in the late 1800s, early 1900s, standing. The one was a woman. She's standing. She's got a baby on one hip, and with the other arm, she's unloading crab traps.
Oh, my God.
Standing in the boat.
Yes.
And these are not very big, folks. They're sort of like shallow, flat-bottomed canoes is about the best way to explain it.
Yeah. To me, they kind of, my husband does kayaking, and they remind me of a forerunner to a kayak because, yeah, you're right. They're very shallow. They're flat. The people must have an incredible sense of balance.
I cannot imagine standing in one. But guess what, folks? It is time for a break.
Oh, okay.
So, while you're listening to the break material, check out my website, www.exogenenetwork.com. Click on the link to the left side of the page and find the live page where we have all the information about tonight's show. Sign up for the newsletter. There's a $5,000 prize for one lucky listener who signs up for it, Outside of that, do stay tuned to the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, and the Dawn of Shades will be right back with Elizabeth Egan Cox. Okay, we should... Welcome back to the Dawn of Shades. I'm your host, Gia Scott, and we are talking tonight with Elizabeth Egan Cox, the author of A Ghost of a Chance. We're also talking a little bit about green publishing and what that means. But before we wander off to a topic, I wanted to let everyone know that if you want to ask the author a question, you may do so simply by raising your hand in the virtual auditorium or by calling in a toll-free number, 1-877-786-0562. And before we go anywhere else, Elizabeth, would you be so kind as to give your website, where your book's available, and so forth and so on, before we head off on a topic again?
Oh, certainly. Okay, my website is my name, and that is Elizabeth, as in the Queen of England, Elizabeth. My maiden name, Egan, and that is E-A-G-A-N, and then my married name of Cox, C-O-X. So it is ElizabethEganCox.com. You can go to the website, you can read about my book, you can read about my reason for doing electronic publishing as a traditional author, not a self-published author. And you can email me if you have any questions. Now, as far as the book, technically, the book is not going to be released until August 1st. The publisher is ebooksonThe.net. However, the publisher did release the book to MobiPocket.com, and that is M as in Michael, O, B as in boy, I, and then the word pocket, like what's in your skirt or pants.com. MobiPocket is a major distributor of electronic book publishing. In about a month, it'll be found on Amazon.com and on FictionWise.com. Those are two major distributors, as well as other places. I know from having done hard print publishing, it does take a few weeks to get it onto the distribution of Amazon and FictionWise and other places like that. If in doubt, go to my website, email me, and I'll let you know where to find it.
And to folks, it'll probably be the end of the week before I get it posted, but we'll have a review posted on Exogeny Network as well. So you can look, see the cover of the book, and we'll probably have the link, at least one link to buy it if you'd like, on the website as well. So before we go any further, why don't you tell us a little bit about the book?
Okay. The book is the first in what's being called a cozy paranormal mystery. And once again, that's the latest buzzword to try and categorize the book because it has a ghost in it, and the ghost is treated as a character critical to the plot. This is not... The ghost is as real as any of the other characters, to try to make a long story short. So in that sense, it would not be a fantasy, like going into some of the other fantasy books, and that would be more of a sci-fi. Anyway, the storyline of the book is Shannon Delaney is the lead character. Shannon Delaney thought her dream assignment in San Diego would open new doors for her writing career. She could not have guessed that her new home, the very Victorian Blackthorn House Mansion, would be a porthole to a century-old mystery. Shannon settles into her assignment to chronicle the mansion's fascinating history for a publicity brochure advertising it as an authentic Victorian bed and breakfast inn. However, before Shannon can put pen to paper, a ghostly encounter leaves her wondering if her dream assignment isn't a nightmare. Caught up in the spectral mission of the mansion's original owner, Eric Blackthorne, master magician, Shannon endures ghastly discoveries to solve a long-ago crime. Complicating her life is the involvement with the handsome and very real Alex Blackthorne, descendant of the ghostly Eric Blackthorne. Shannon can't make up her mind if Alex is a hindrance or a help to her. Certainly he is just as enchanting as his ancestor, but can she trust him? Then, too, there is Zach Zavala. Zach seems to be what Alex is not. Straightforward and easy to read, no tricks up his sleeve. And Zach has the guy next door good looks that Shannon has always given a second chance to. Plus, Zach's grandfather, Francisco Zavala, is a kindred spirit to Shannon. He senses Shannon's apprehension about her paranormal experiences, and he knows how to calm her uneasiness. Night after night, clues haunt Shannon's sleep through a series of things that go bump in the night experiences. In daylight, eerily odd occurrences stack up together, making it crystal clear what path Shannon must take to reveal the truths that will give final peace to the tortured soul of Eric Blackthorne. In the end, with the mystery of Blackthorne House solved, Shannon is left with a bigger question. What about Alex and Zach? Must she choose between them? Now, I realize that sounds like there's a romantic twist to it, but all of the guys out there who don't like romance, you can not worry. The romantic twist is extremely light, and I did that because I did not want it classified as a romantic mystery. The supernatural aspect or the ghost aspect to it and Shannon's experiences with spirit visitations is far more critical and viable to the plot line than the romance element. I would like to say that
the character, reading her, having grown up with my mother slapping the label, what I was a ghost magnet.
Okay, yeah.
I can kind of get Shannon having this sort of event happening. Now, have you ever had a ghostly encounter of your own?
Yeah, I would call it a spirit visitation, but that's just my phrasing for it. I was talking with a really good friend of mine. We grew up together, little girls together, 7 and 8 years old, and she is also of Irish ancestry. And she and I have kind of talked about this our whole life, but also kind of growing up in a very Celtic sense of what the natural world is. That kind of thing was not second nature to me, but it was probably more first nature. And I can say that my spirit visitation or ghostly experiences, for the most part, have been very, very good. One of the things that I've always done, and because as a person who's written about California history, I go out and do a lot of field research. I know one person who interviewed me, and this was a long time ago, said, well, you really do go stepping very lightly through cemeteries. And I said, well, yes, I do. And I also go to many of these historic mansions as well as the original adobe haciendas and ranchos going back into the 1800s. Before I enter any kind of a home, whether it's 150 years old or whether it was built last year, before I enter, I always put my right hand up about at shoulder level and place it just to the right of the door frame before I enter. And I can't explain it, but I always get sort of a sense or a sensory vibration about the ambiance of it. And that kind of helps me when I enter into the home. Case in point is that the book cover is of a historic Victorian mansion in Redlands, California, not in San Diego. The story takes place in San Diego, and in the author's notes I do mention another place called the Villa Montezuma, a very real place in San Diego that you can take public tours of. That place gave me a negative feeling. It's kind of dark inside. So, but it was an inspiration to the story. But as far as when I picture where Shannon's bedroom is in the Blackthorne House mansion, the Morey Mansion, which the likeness of is on the cover of the book, that's what I had in mind. And I've been in the Morey Mansion several times, And the very first time I was in it, I did that, and you just get a very good feeling about the Morey Mansion, and it's way over 100 years old. It really is a classic, sort of a gingerbread American Victorian mansion. So in that sense, I have. But I also get a sense of it when I walk through cemeteries. And when I walk through cemeteries, if it's out here in California, I walk through the older part. Case in point, in Colton, California, it's very well known that in a small cemetery called Hermosa is where the brother of Wyatt Earp is laid to rest. Colton, California has a long history with the Earp family. My grandparents lived right around the corner from the home of Virgil Earp. Virgil Earp was a law enforcement officer for that area in the 1800s, early 1900s. And you'll love this since you're from the Arizona area. In Tombstone, the one Earp brother who was killed was Morgan Earp. And one of my favorite movies is Tombstone, the one that has Val Kilmer and Kurt Russell in it. And in part of that movie, they send Morgan's remains back home. They're sending them to Colton, California, and Morgan is buried in Hermosa Cemetery. I love that little cemetery. A lot of my family is buried there, too. And you get good feelings when you walk around that cemetery, except every once in a while I'll walk close to an old gravestone. And like most cemeteries, even though this one is very well taken care of, some of the, because it dates back to the early 1800s, some of the stones are hard to read. They're careworn, they're time-worn, they're wind-worn. And if I get a bad feeling, I'll kind of bend down and I'll look and try to read, the stone and to see what happened. 9 times out of 10, the person had a violent death, or it was a very young person who died, tragically. They may have died of a disease, or they may have been killed in an accident. In the small cemeteries like Hermosa, it's easy to go online and do research and find out, about that person when they died and what may have happened to them. So that, in that sense. And the other aspect of it, and this is very crucial to my Celtic ancestry, my Celtic nature. One of my sisters, Mary Bridget Egan Martinez, passed away about a year ago. And a conversation I had with her several years ago, she said to me, "Why are you so driven to write?" And I told her, I said, "Mary Bridget, it's because of blood memory. I listen to the whispers of my ancestors, our ancestors, and I write because of them. And when I'm writing a story, especially one that's fiction like this one, A Ghost of a Chance, it gets to a point, because I do plot, and I do summarize as I go along. It makes it easier to write a synopsis. And for those who don't know, it's the author who writes the synopsis that you might read on a Cell Point website. It's the author who wrote that. Well, when I get to a point where I'm not quite sure what I want to happen, I quite literally dream it. I go to sleep and I dream it. I get up the next day and I write it. Case in point is, in this story, 2 lead characters, Shannon Delaney and Alex Blackthorne, are doing a meet and greet. Alex had just done a benefit magic performance, and almost everyone has left the auditorium. And at that point, I wasn't sure what I was going to do, and so I went to sleep and I dreamt it, and the next day I got up and Francisco Zavala quite literally appeared out of thin air. Francisco Zavala, who is a retired detective from San Diego, and Francisco's specialty was the investigation of high-end art and artifacts. I did not know he was going to be in my story until I sat down and I wrote it. And that's
I love to hear other people talk about, everybody has heard the expression, "let me sleep on it."
Yes.
And for me, that's a very literal request. Whether I have an issue I'm trying to solve, whether it's something broken I need to fix, whether it's an interpersonal problem, whatever it is, and I say, "let me sleep on it," I may wake up very tired the next morning, but I will have a solution. Well, it's a way that what I do is I try out various scenarios till I find the one that works best.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do this in your sleep, and why I can't do it awake, I don't know. Maybe because I have too many other thoughts running through my head. But I do. I do that in my sleep, and I have done it all my life.
You know, I think a lot of people do that in their sleep, but maybe they don't want to share that aspect of their life. I've never been afraid to tell people that. And I included a little bit about that, and I don't want to give the clue away, but Shannon, the lead character, a lot of the mystery and the clues come to her in dreams. And I incorporated a part of that in the sense that she has a dream. It's her second dream. And a character appears to her and tells her, dreams are answers to questions we have yet to ask. And I think often we come to points in our life, and whether we consider it a déjà vu moment or whatever, it's like, oh yeah, okay, I know what to do, and it's because it did come to us at one time in a dream. You know, whether it's just trying to work through a logical situation, or it might be something a little bit more spiritual, and you have to make maybe an ethical or a decision from the heart, and you're not sure. And I think dreams are often the answers to questions we have to ask. So I don't know if I answered your question or not, but I hope it did. I do believe very strongly in blood memory. And being a person who...
what I would call a racial memory or genetic memory. But
there you go,
it's an idea.
Uh-huh. Yeah, racial memory, genetic memory. To me, it's a blood memory. It's just like we inherit certain talents from our ancestors, or certain physical attributes. You know, I have a very thick head of Irish hair that through my life I have often complained about, but I do love it. But I think we also inherit other aspects that have a spiritual sense to it, the non-tangible talents and gifts that we have inherited from our ancestors. And I think part of that, too, is that if we listen and if we open up to it, we can hear our ancestors' voices. And I do write because I hear my ancestors whispering. That's the only reason
I've had more than just whisper, because I've actually had very vivid dreams in which, relatives would appear with very specific messages, you might say.
Mm-hmm.
That it kind of was, whoa, because when it's something that specific, because in the scenes in which Shannon is getting her messages via her dreams, I really can get it. I don't know, maybe it's because the paranormal world is very much a part of my day-to-day world,
mm-hmm.
but, it makes sense to me. It's not like, you just dream this up out of whole cloth.
Right.
It fits the reality of life when you have a heavy paranormal influence, you might say.
Yes, and because this is the first book in the series, this is new to Shannon. She's still kind of working her way through it.
In the book, she's young.
Yes.
And that would be normal.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I'm reading the book, it's very easy to see my daughter in that sort of a situation, because she's roughly the same age as Shannon.
Mm-hmm.
And, it kind of, like I said, it seems very real. We don't have a lot of life experience when we're 20-something.
That's true.
And we do hopefully become wiser with age. I hope I'm much wiser than I was when I was 20-something.
Mm-hmm. Well, and in that aspect, her I don't know, the person who really understands her, and this unfolds during the story, is the retired detective Francisco Zavala. And to me, that's wonderful, because he's retired. He's very, he's received many accolades for his work. He quite literally will go to the ends of the earth, or in this case, during the story, he goes to Manizales, Colombia, South America, to get to the clues that he needs to help in solving the mystery. And he recognizes that aspect in Shannon. and he is able to kind of comfort her. And to me, that's wonderful, because here's a person who sees every aspect of life. He's been a police detective. He's retired. He's very successful. And he's able to kind of relate to her to be a kindred spirit. You know, so
yeah,
to me...
Yeah. Well, I have to admit, you know, one of the people over the years that I've talked about paranormal events with is a retired, guess what, of Irish descent, police officer.
Yes, yes.
And, you know, talking about situations in which, you know, he'd been a detective, you know, and he'd been around the block, you know, and he'd seen some gory things, some horrible things.
Yes.
And he had very profound belief about the soul.
Yes.
That came from things he saw.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know people who are in law enforcement. In fact, I have them in my family. And they see the worst and they see the best, you know, and they have to live with that. And many of them, even the younger ones, don't bat an eye when you talk about something that is profound and spiritual, or what would be considered paranormal or supernatural, you know.
Well, you know, whether you want to call it a hunch, a gut feeling, or, you know, being psychic, it all boils down to the same thing.
Sure.
You know, you got an idea from somewhere other than arriving at it logically.
Yeah, I call that intuitive sense. And I think in everyday life we tend to get away from our intuitive sense. I know many people would call it a gut instinct, but to me it's an intuitive sense. Some people might call it a sixth sense. I think it's there. I think we have the ability for it. It's just that some people might grow up more open with it, and so they naturally polish it. They kind of naturally advance it. Other people may grow up with a strong bias against that because of I don't know, family feelings, you know, restrictions on talking about it, whatever. But growing up very Celtic, growing up very close to my Irish and Scottish nature, like I said, I don't know anyone in my Celtic culture who hesitates to talk about having an intuitive sense and when we were first aware of it and what we may have done to encourage it or open it. Or it's like anything else, you know, it's like trying to polish your writing. Sure, you can go to college for it, and you certainly have to do other things to polish it. But if you don't have it to begin with, it's not going to do any good. And in order to have it to begin with, you have to open up to it. You know?
Yeah.
So I would call that intuitive sense. And I've always had it. You know, and most of the time, it probably happens with my dreams, or if I'm in an area where, just by the experience of the area, such as a cemetery or an old home, I don't think old houses or old architecture are necessarily going to have more paranormal activity, except for the fact that by their age, they have the opportunity to have had more experiences, just like living beings. As we age, we have the opportunity to have more experiences.
Yeah, I've also been told always that the location the house is built on can have, you might say, paranormal phenomena that pre-exist the structure on it.
Oh, I believe that. I certainly.
So you might have a ghost that's been there for 1,000 years, but the building's only 200 years old, or 20 years old, or 2 days old.
Exactly. Yeah. I think I really too. Before, all of my ancestry is Southern, and so when I travel throughout the South visiting my ancestors and rattling bones, I strongly get a sense about that. You know, when we were in the Tidewater area of Virginia and going on the country roads out there, just passing over this ancient road that my family helped to build because it was the road that went up to the church. You could get out and you could kind of walk that road. Yes, it has all of your blacktop and modern pavement on it. It's been widened and whatever. And then you go over this little brook and there's a stream. And there's something there. You know, there's something there. It isn't just the fact that you had to have a house built on it or, a carriage barn or whatever. It's the land. And I think as humans we need to respect that. That goes back to my Celtic culture that I'm also Christian, but I believe in the Celtic culture of Christianity that the presence of God is in all elements. And so it doesn't take a man-built structure for there to be a presence of God. I can go out into the forest and the presence is there every bit as much as when I go into the sanctuary of my church.
Yeah, I would say one of the most profound experiences I had in terms of a place, I would call it was like an emotional stain.
Oh, yeah.
Way to describe it. I was with my grandmother, my mother, and my 2 children, which at that time were like 12 and 4.
Mm-hmm.
And we were visiting an old mission in New Mexico. There was the church itself was reduced to ruins. It just had walls. The roof was gone. The doors were gone, so forth and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And we'd been walking around, and my grandmother had visited this place many times before, and she had stopped and was sitting on a bench, and my mom was sitting with her, and they were, talking about whatever. And I was, it's a small place, so, I'm not worried about the kids being right there with me,
Mm-hmm.
And I was sort of walking around, and I walked in through what would have been the original doors to enter the church. And it was like, whoa, because it was a feeling of absolute dread and terror.
Mm-hmm.
I got the feeling that some of the people who went through that door did not want to go in there.
Oh, definitely.
And so I just had to leave because it was kind of like nauseating.
Mm-hmm.
And I went outside and I sat on a bench real close where I could watch as the kids were walking around. And my son walked in next, and, he's a 4-year-old, okay?
Mm-hmm.
He has no clue what's going on. He doesn't even know what the mission is, really. And he walks in, he just knows it's an old place, and Mom's always dragging him to old places, Just look around and don't get out of sight, And he walks in and he stops, and he kind of looks around, and he backs out.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. And then my daughter, she walked in a little bit further, but she's kind of stopped, and she sort of looked around, and then she immediately left too. Neither one of them walked more than 10 feet into the building.
Yes.
And so it was not only a case of I felt it, and I would have been aware of the history, that went with some of these missions,
Mm-hmm.
but they weren't, and they still felt it, because I didn't say anything to them about it.
Yes.
For all they knew, I was sitting down because I was hot.
Oh, yeah. Well, see, and I think children, or at least I can remember as a child being probably more in touch with that intuitive sense. But as a child, unless you have someone that you feel kindred to tell about it, you just kind of keep it to yourself. But I think children, because they're still open, they're always going to be more of a sponge in that sense for that kind of experience. And, the bringing up the fact that it was an old mission, I think there's a huge misconception among people that if it's a church, nothing bad could have happened there, or you won't get a bad spirit feeling from it. Oh, my gosh, not too long ago, I went to a funeral service at a fairly modern church, very well-known church in the Inland Empire area, Southern California. And I'd only been in the church one other time, and every time I've gone into it, I don't have a good feeling. And indeed, the church that I do go to is one that I've chosen to go to, even though it's at like a 35-minute drive, because I have a good feeling going into it.
There's a church.
The church that's on your website. What church is that?
That happens to be the Little Brown Church of the Vale. Remember the song?
Yeah.
And that church is in northern Iowa.
Oh.
But it's a neat little church. I've visited several times.
Uh-huh.
Every time I happen to be traveling through that area, I will detour enough to stop there. I like it. I don't know why. It's one of those nice little places.
Mm-hmm.
And it's out in the country, and yeah. And you can see on the website, it's a cute little church.
Yes, it is.
It's a cute little church. And like I said, I stopped probably 4 or 5 times.
Now, I have to ask
years.
you, too, since we're talking about the church that's on your website, there's one photo of it that shows, like, the steps that lead up to it, and there's a little saying there. Is that actually on the steps?
Yes, it is.
Oh, wow.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I don't remember the saying now, but I really enjoyed it.
You know, it just flew out of my mind, too. And it was profound enough. I think my daughter actually took that snapshot.
Uh-huh.
And it was profound enough that she did take that snapshot. And because it was something that sort of caught you and kind of went,
Well, because, and you know what, I can't get internet access where I'm at right now. That's 2 stories up, since I'm down here hiding out from the California earthquakes in my basement. But what struck me about that saying is that it was spiritual rather than religious, and it was spiritual in the sense that it would appeal to any denomination or any religion.
To be honest, I don't know what denomination that church is.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I don't have a clue. Anytime I have stopped there, we've been the only people there.
Oh.
Which is a little weird, I suppose. But there's never been anyone else there. Now, granted, it was in the fall last year when I was there last. And in the fall, there's not as many people driving around. And it was during the week, I think. So it wasn't a Saturday when other people would be.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I've never had anybody else there. No one from the church has ever been there. The church is just left open.
Those are some of my favorite churches. And when we were in the Bayou Country there of East Texas, we came across some. And one of them, it was probably more of a chapel than it was a church, but it was at Scottsville, which is east of Marshall. And it's a historic cemetery. I love to go to the little cemeteries that you find just kind of off the beaten path in the southern states. And I'm not saying that as opposed to the northern states. It's just that the southern states is where I travel. And this one had your larger-than-life angels, larger-than-life monuments. It was mostly Confederate, but not all of it was Confederate. And there was a little chapel there that was open. And then you just find, we were out there in the northern neck of Virginia, and we found several little churches, old-fashioned churches built in the 1800s that were open. I just love it going there. And it gives me a sense of what the colonial ancestors were doing, and just how having that spiritual place to go to was probably a great relief to them, considering the hardships of their lives. And I also find that, too, out here in the West, to, some of the missions, not all the missions, and I think I've traveled to all of them in Southern California. You don't get a good vibe at all of them, but there are many that you do get a good vibe at. And to go in there, in the missions out here were very much forts, the Army forts out there in your plain states of Montana and Nebraska and that area. The missions out here in California were more like a community. It wasn't just the center of their religious life. It was the center of networking as a community. It quite literally was going to the town square. And you didn't have to be Roman Catholic or Spanish Catholic to go there. You could go there for a fandango. You could go there for a wedding. You could go there to network with business. So some of the missions had really good vibes, others not so much. So.
Now, I pulled up the website, and I can actually give you the saying now off the steps.
Oh, good.
It says, let me live by the side of the road and be a friend to man.
Oh, isn't that wonderful?
And this church is literally by the side of the road.
There's
a little roadside park across the Blacktop Road from it. There's a little gravel parking lot, some big old trees around it, and it's just a really, really nice place.
Yes.
Yeah, and if you ask me the name of the town, I don't have a clue, but I'm sure if anybody's curious, you search on the Little Brown Church in the Vale, and that is the church that is up on the website. And like I said, it's one of those places that just fun. You know, it's just nice. They sold a cookbook there to raise money for whatever. Oh. And this is the sort of thing it was. It was sold in the honor system. You put your money in a little thing. It was locked, you know, the money thing was. But the books are there, you know. You know, you just put your money in the can and go on your way.
Mhm. Yeah, I like those places. In A Ghost of a Chance, part of it takes place way out in the Warner Springs area, the back country of San Diego, and that's not far from Julian, and that's not far from Santa Isabel, I think is the name of the little place, which is in the valley right below Julian. For those of you who aren't familiar, Julian is still San Diego County. It's a mountain area. It's known for its apple orchards. In California, the only place that you get apples is when you go up into the higher elevations of the Southern California mountains. And there is a little church there, and I think it's called the Church of Santa Isabel. And it's either on or very near the local Indian reservation. And the Indians still come to that church to get their water. And that church is a small church. And it's a very nice little place to just stop and go into. It's open. I've never known it to be closed. And what to me was so amazing about that little church, as small as it is, it has the most incredibly beautiful stained glass windows that I have ever seen. By far more beautiful than some of the wealthiest churches I've ever seen. And nothing else in the church looks so upscale as the windows, and yet the windows are old. You know, and so that to have that contrast, because it is your Adobe fashioned mission church built in the 1800s, and you walk in and it's the plain flat wooden benches, very plain altar. I guess that would be an altar. And then the stained glass windows. There is such this incredible contrast. And I've always thought that the people of that church, you know, must have given dearly to put those windows in. And here it is out in the middle of nowhere in a very rural area, and it remains to this day undamaged. And so, you know, I know people who travel throughout Southern California and they talk about graffiti and vandalism and whatever. And it's nice to say that, kind of like reminds me of the Highlander series. There is holy land. There is holy land that is free from graffiti and vandalism. And this little church that is susceptible to who knows who out in the middle of a rural area, you know, must be a place that people still respect. Thank goodness.
Yeah. Now, you know, we're talking about churches that had bad feelings. There's a little country church not far from New Orleans.
Mm-hmm.
And I am not kidding. I've never been in it. I couldn't get that close to it. And there's nothing outstanding about it. It's a little one-room, clapboard Catholic church. It looks very similar to any little country church you'd ever see. There's nothing that says ultra creepy. But the hair will stand up on the back of my neck. I cannot make myself move away from the vehicles like, let's leave now.
Yeah.
Now, when the hurricane came, it's a very old church from the 1800s, the floodwater did pick it up and move it across the road. And I gather that it's not been put back yet or anything. But I don't even want to go look at it. You know, I don't like that church. That church is absolutely... The hair on the back of my neck stands up. I want nothing to do with it. I don't even like driving down that road. I mean, that's the kind of aversion I have to this particular church.
I had a bad feeling about a church when I was there in New Orleans. We stayed in the Garden District, and it was near Coliseum Park. I don't remember the name of it, and I don't even remember the denomination of it. It was certainly an older church, probably late 1800s. Maybe mid-1800s. Maybe it dates back to the very beginning of the Garden District. I don't know. But I got a very bad feeling of it, and I wouldn't even cross the street to go over to it.
You get where I'm coming from with that. I didn't even want to leave the vehicle. I did not want to step foot on the ground. The church was on.
Yes, and so you have to wonder, is it the church, or was it the grounds, or was it the happenings inside the church, or...
what makes it such an icky place? Yeah.
Yeah, or Well, I think anytime you have a place where people gather, and they gather for all of what I call the life mark events, you know, whether it's a birth, a death, a baptism, a wedding, you know, whatever. And because you have such a variety of people, you know, gathering there, there's bound to be a bad experience at some time or another, whether it's related to the large group of people who have gone there over the time or it's related to the administration of the church over the time period, you know. And
yeah.
I think often it has a lot to do with the administration.
You know, I've been to places that I know were scenes of murders, sometimes horrific murders, and yet there would be nothing there. I mean, you didn't get a feeling of, there was nothing creepy there. And I've been to places where there wasn't a murder, maybe someone died of natural causes.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you would have powerful feelings.
Yes.
So, you know, you kind of wonder, what is the real difference?
I don't know. I just don't know. But I've gotten that feeling when I've walked through some of the older cemeteries. And sometimes it is a sense of violence. And other times it's this great sense of sorrow. And when I've discovered that it was a sense of sorrow, usually it was someone who died, what I would say, before their time. Maybe they died of a horrible disease, or they died of tragedy. You know, I'm very hesitant to go back to New Orleans because of Katrina and just the misery, you know, that had happened there. And yet I have a great affection for it. Another place that I feel that way about is Galveston, because of the hurricane that happened there, and I think that was around 1901. A really, really good book about that is called Isaac Storm by Eric Larson. He writes what I call nonfiction novels. And just, if you read that book, Isaac Storm, it probably gives you a very good insight to what happened on a personal level to many of the people during Katrina who could not get out. You know, so, but you know, New Orleans has seen so many tragedies over the years and so much history that it's got to be one of the most haunted. And I don't really like to use that word, but I don't know. When I think of places like New Orleans, I'm also thinking of a place that we'll be going to over Halloween week, and that's Vicksburg. And when you have events that are such human, physical, and spiritual impression over time and time and time again, how can it not leave that ripple effect? You know?
Oh, it has to. It has to.
Yeah.
You'll have to, while you're at Vicksburg, go to Natchez, though.
Oh, we'll probably go to Natchez, and there was another place I wanted to go to that I can't remember. I have it written down. But we'll be at Vicksburg for 8 days, and we'll be renting a car, so we'll be going, you know, a little bit down from Vicksburg and a little bit up from Vicksburg, and maybe a little bit in.
Oh, it's a wonderful, wonderful area.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, there's so many things to see and do and whatnot, just in terms of history in this area.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so yeah, it easily becomes overwhelming almost to choose what you're going to be doing.
Oh, yes, I can imagine. But you know, I think there's many, well, it depends on your interest. My interest is genealogy and history, and my husband loves traveling through the South, although all of his ancestry goes back to New England. He's a member of the Sons of the American Revolution, and I keep kind of nagging him to do a little bit more research because I'd love to go to New England over Halloween week, you know, because they talk about how beautiful it is in that area.
Right, right.
But I know we would go to Gettysburg because my husband has an interest in the war between the states. And I feel kind of about Gettysburg the way I feel about the battlefield at Vicksburg. We'll see. I don't know if I actually want to go there.
Ah,
We just came out of Virginia last year, and we went to the battlefield at Petersburg. My husband walked the battlefield. I went over to the historic district of Petersburg and did antique shopping.
Well, folks, we have run out of time again, and the show's coming to a close. So I hope you found tonight's program interesting and enlightening. If you want to comment on tonight's program, suggest a guest, or whatever, it's very easy to contact me. Just go to www.exogenynetwork.com and click on Contact Us. You can't ask for anything simpler, right? Outside of that, it's time for me to go, so tune in again next week for another interesting program. I'm your host, Gia Scott, and good night.